Hi everyone, this is Mindy Egan for lawnfawn, and in today's video I'm going to use the spooky forest backdrop to create a fall scene. Some of the supplies I'm using today is the Stitched Pumpkin die set, Scripty Autumn Sentiments, Happy Harvest stamp set, the Winter Birds, I have the Spooky Forest backdrop, the Stitched Hillside border, and then the Fall Leaves stencil. I'm going to be starting by ink blending my background, and I'm going to be doing this using the stamp wheel. If you haven't seen this before, this is a stamping platform. It has grippers on the bottom, and this is your top plate that you would use to put your stamps on and stamp an image. But I'm just going to be using this grip mat that is in there for right now. I mean, you could leave it in there for your stencils, but I prefer to take it out. The material of this grip mat is very similar to what your stamp sets are made of, and it's going to grip down to my work surface, which is a glass work surface. Then I have a piece of white cardstock cut to 4¼ by 5½, and that is also going to grip to that grip mat. So it's going to be stuck in place. Now I'm taking one of the layers of the fall leaves, I placed it over my cardstock, and on the edges, I'm just going to push down so that my stencil is held in place. Now I can start ink blending. I'm going to start with sunflower ink from Lawnfawn and a blending brush, and I'm just going to sporadically place this over my background. Some areas I might leave a little whiter than others, and what I'm going to do is build up my fall colors. So I brought in Wild Rose. Some of these areas I'm going to go over completely. It's going to change into that orange when it overlaps with the yellow. And some of the areas that I had left kind of more white are going to have more of that pinkish reddish tone. Then to really bring in some fall vibes, I'm going to bring in dough ink. So it's kind of a lighter brown. And this one I'm going to kind of scatter throughout my background. I'm really trying to sporadically place this so that it's not so heavily concentrated with one color in one area. Once I have this first layer down, I can just carefully peel up my stencil, and then I have my cardstock is still stuck in place. I'm going to bring in the second layer of the stencil, and I'm going to line that up over the image. There are alignment guides that you could use as well, but I didn't feel I needed it for this. I'm able to just place that over my background and line up the images where needed. I'm going to go over the background. This is the second layer of the stencil using the same colors and the same technique that I did before, starting with the yellow, then coming in with that wild rose and finishing off with the dough ink. I'm not really paying attention if I'm going over the same areas with the same color. It's all going to look really great and create this beautiful fall background. Now, once again, once I have this done, I can just carefully peel up the stencil, and I want to tone this down a little bit. I want this to be a subtle background. I don't want it to be a bright white. So I'm going to bring my blending brushes back in, use some of that leftover ink that's still on my brush, and go over the background. So once again, just kind of sporadically adding that color, the brown, the yellow, the red, and just kind of changing up where I'm placing those colors. Of course, when I go over the yellow with that wild rose, it's going to have or give it that orange tint. Now, a little trick I found is grabbing a palette knife and just kind of sliding that right under my cardstock. It was a lot easier to get the paper released from that background or that grip mat. Now I'm just going to take my stamp chamois and I'm going to wipe it clean, just like you would with your stamps. I don't think I've ever used a cleaner on it, but keep in mind that inks can stain that grip mat, which mine does have some of that red on there and the orange. I'm going to splatter my background with some white paint, so I mix that with a couple drops of water, and I'm going to splatter that white paint all over the background. That just adds a little bit more interest to it. To continue building my scene, I'm going to use this spooky forest backdrop, which I think can be really used year round. It can be winter, spring, fall, and then into Halloween for a spooky background. So here I'm lining it up with some light brown wood grain paper. I'm going to hold that in place with some Post-it tape and run that through my die cut machine, and then just taking my craft pick and poking out those little areas. I want to add a little bit of dimension to my outside areas. So I'm bringing in walnut ink and a mini blending tool, and I'm going to go all around the outer edges of this frame. I'm also going to come in to the branches and add a little bit of that color right under the branches, trying to get to the underside of the branches and then continue all the way around. I could come in and do some from the inside as well to get more of a dimensional look, but I'm going to leave that open for right now because I'm going to do something else to it in just a moment. I want to actually add grass down there. So to do that, I have a piece of white cardstock and I'm going to ink blend just the bottom portion of this piece of white cardstock because I will be trimming it down. I'm starting off with old paper in the Distress Oxide ink line. I'm bringing in that spooky backdrop to kind of get an idea about how high I need to go. This was actually a little bit too high because those grass pieces don't go up super high. Now I'm going to bring in peeled paint and I'm just very carefully adding that color to the bottom, blending up, keeping in mind that the very bottom portion of this is going to be covered up. But I do want to show that transition of color, and I really like this color blend because I feel like it really plays into that fall vibe. So I figured out about what I needed to die cut, and I'm just running that through so I can save that other piece of cardstock. I'm not wasting it with trees that I'm not going to use. So here how that looks once I die cut it with that spooky forest backdrop. And I'm using my scissors and I'm creating my own little hill. So I'm just going to trim that off. I'm not doing anything else to this piece, so I'm going to go ahead and add tape runner to the back. I just wanted to make sure it lined up and looked okay. But I'll add the tape runner to the back of this and to the top of those grass pieces, and then attach that to the bottom of my card. I also want to add a hill to the background. And so to do that, I have that scrap piece of cardstock that I trimmed off. And I'm kind of getting an idea about how high I want it to go just by placing my frame off on the side. I'll hold one of the stitched hillsides in place with post-it tape so I can die cut out my hill. Now I'm going to use the same oxide colors that I did for my grass, starting with that old paper. Then I'm going to bring in peeled paint. Now I'm going to bring this up quite a bit. And then I want to intensify that darker color. This wasn't too dark. I really wanted to show more of a definition between the two layers of grass, I guess I would say, or hills. So I brought in pine needles. Now this one too, I brought up quite a ways because there's going to be some images covering this. And I'm going to go back over it with that peeled paint and old paper. I really wanted to have that really light area at the top and then the dark towards the bottom. My scene is really starting to come together, so now I can stamp out and color my images. I have a piece of Express It cardstock that I placed back into that stamp wheel, and I lined up images here. I have the sunflowers from Happy Harvest and a couple of those birds from the Winter Birds stamp set. Because he's got a scarf on, I think it makes a really good fall bird too, just depending what colors you use to color it in. So I flipped that stamp wheel or that kind of top wheel portion over so I could ink up my image. I'm flipping it back over to stamp these down. Now, what's hard to see right now is I have just a little floral enamel sticker down in the very bottom in the center of this plate. And I use that to tell me or pretty much guide me on where my plate needs to go. So it's always going to be in the center when I stamp my images down. I had cleaned off that larger sunflower and stamped it again so I could have 3 of them, and then used that palette knife to help release my paper. To color in my images, I'm going to be using my Copic markers today. For these sunflowers, I'm going to use E13, Y18, Y15, and Y11. And I know that's a lot of colors for something that's pretty small, but I feel for me this gives the most definition. You can certainly drop that down to 2 or 3 colors, whatever your coloring style is. So I started with that E13 just to give that little bit of a shadow area. Followed that with Y18. Now the Y18, I really actually go over that E13. The E13 is really just giving it more of a warm shadow tone, and then finished out with the rest of the colors. Now after I have it colored in, I do come back in with that E13 and just kind of emphasize those stamped lines to highlight it a little bit more and give it a little bit more definition. Now for the smaller one, I don't quite use all of the colors, especially on the petals that are in the very back. I only use the E13 and Y15 because they are super teeny tiny. And then for the rest of the petals, I'm going to go through those same ones. I might skip around, maybe not using all 4 of those when it comes to the small one, but I definitely went back over it with an E13 like I said, to kind of help emphasize those lines. Now I use the Y15 to color in the beaks of the birds. And for the center of the sunflowers, I am using E29, E25, and E23. I'm not worried about those little dots because I will be filling those in later with a white gel pen. I had really contemplated with the birds. I kind of really wanted to do a chickadee, but I thought a bluebird would just pop out a little bit more against my background. So for those colors, I am using B16, B14, and B12. For this bird that's flying, I added the darkest color to kind of the tips of the wings and then the underside, and then blended that out, trying to make sure that my B12 is the color that is shown the most, so he doesn't look too dark. And then I'll come in with an N2 and just add a little bit of that neutral gray to the very sides of the bird, and then here coming out from where I ended with the blue. For the scarf, I just used the same colors that I did for the center of my sunflowers, which is the E29, 25, and 23. I'm going to pop back in with an R20 to add a little bit of a pink cheek to my bird. Then I will take the coordinating die for each of the images, hold them in place with Post-it tape, and die cut those out with my die cut machine. I'm going to be die cutting out my stitched pumpkins from vanilla malt cardstock, which I'm just going to trim off because I don't need a ton of it. I just need a little strip. And then for the stems, I'm going to use my scraps from the light brown woodgrain cardstock because I only have like one sheet left, and this is my favorite woodgrain cardstock. So I added a little bit of the walnut ink to the stems and then used the leftover brown to add a little bit, just a little bit, to the edge of my pumpkins. I didn't want my pumpkins to turn brown, but I did want to have a little bit of ink blending to them. So now I'm just using my tweezers and my lawnfawn liquid glue, and I'm going to go ahead and attach the stems to my pumpkins because I don't have anything else I want to do to these. I'm trying to think ahead a little bit in case there's extra things I need to do. I always seem to forget about them and then struggle with it later. But the pumpkins, I knew I was done with. I could go ahead and attach those. I'm bringing in my stamp wheel once again, and I'm going to stamp the word fall in the walnut ink onto some white cardstock. And I had a little bit of a smudge when I stamped it down. I think it's just because I didn't clean it very well the first time. So I just flipped my cardstock and I'm going to stamp it again. I love these sentiments because they are scripty and also because they have a coordinating die to die cut out that scripty word. So I use the coordinating die to die cut that stamped out one. I also die cut out 2 or 3 more that I can layer together with my liquid glue, and that's going to help build up the dimension. And now I can start kind of building my scene. So I'm going to start by adding my hillside to the background. And you may notice that my cardstock has a little stamped hello up there. I apologize, I don't know where the footage went for that. I might have deleted it on accident, but I had actually just used some black ink and an acrylic block to stamp that up there. Normally, sentiments are an afterthought for me, so I was trying to be ahead, and I guess I was a little too far ahead. So for my frame, I went through and added these thin foam strips behind it, so they're really skinny and they fit perfectly behind that border. I also added a few pieces behind my branches to add some stability, and then I removed the backing of that and added that over my background. Now it seems no matter what I do, I'm always just slightly off, so I'll just take my scissors and trim off anything that is overhanging. And then I can start filling in my scenes. I had debated about doing orange pumpkins, but I thought the white pumpkins or kind of more of that off-white would stand out get a little bit better against my fall background. So I'm going to start by adding some sunflowers behind my pumpkins. And to do that, I'm using just some liquid glue. When I had put those foam strips on the bottom of my frame, I made sure to leave room so that I could tuck the pumpkins in. So I'm using the liquid glue for the sunflowers and then just tape runner to add the pumpkins kind of in between those 2 hills. The bird up on top here that's going to be sitting on a branch, I just use the tape runner. And for the bird that's going to be flying in, he's going to be overhanging a little bit. So I used one of those foam strips to add to the back, like where his head would be. And then the rest of it, I just added some tape runner or liquid glue so that he's still flush with the front of the card. And then added the liquid glue to the word fall so I could attach that to the center, and finishing off all of my images using a white gel pen to add some highlights to my sunflowers and the bird. And then that's going to finish up my fall card project using that spooky forest backdrop. So it's not just spooky, and especially with using a wood grain cardstock, you can use this year round. Thank you so much for spending time with us today, and I'll see you again soon.